Welcome to the With You and For You podcast. Our desire is to equip college-age students within the Edmond, OKC area by discussing topics and questions that are relevant to our generation. With that in mind, let's get to the show. Welcome back to the With You and For You podcast. As always, it is your host, Riley Jackson, with my three friends, Krista Dye, Tyson Hill, and Kyle Thomas. Why are you laughing already? What happened? What's wrong?
Well, I love the energy you bring to the table, bro. Love it.
Thanks. Okay.
Yep. That's it. That's what I got. Right. That is what I got.
Okay. That's really good.
All right.
So excited to be here.
The last one that I'm editing right now, you definitely were like real loud.
Oh, why'd you just do that?
When did I do that?
I like how you're just mimicking what is going to be super annoying.
But I cut it out, but I can't cut this out now.
No. Dang it. They never would have known.
I know, but it's my mouth making the noises, so it's okay.
Oh, that's fine. So today we're going to be kind of shifting gears a little bit, and we're going to be talking about emotional regulation. And the definition of that, in case we've kind of, it's kind of a confusing topic, but it's the ability to exert control over your own emotional state. So we have three psychology majors, or three psychology degrees, and a sociology degree, which I don't count apparently in Tyson's eyes, but they're pretty familiar with this concept. So we're going to be talking about what that is today. The part of emotional regulation, the main part of it is emotions. So we know that emotions are important in our everyday lives, but should we trust them?
You really looked like you were about to say something.
He's faking out an answer.
Okay, so should we trust our emotions?
Yeah.
I mean, yes and no, because I mean there are some times where sometimes you can be feeling a certain way that I can't think of an example. I wish I could, but that you should trust your emotions and lean into them in that time of I should get out of here.
This person's scary.
Yeah,
Run away.
I should not be here right now.
Why is he breathing heavily near me?
Yeah. Okay.
Why is this guy that just asked me out not blinking while looking at me?
Yeah, if you feel awkward and you're I want to leave this situation, it's okay to lean into your emotions there and not just push through and be I shouldn't trust this and I should just endure in this conversation right now.
That's right. I think there are definitely times when if you don't feel comfortable,
it's okay to leave.
You having the discernment to be okay, am I not feeling comfortable because I'm stepping out in faith, trusting the Lord to have a gospel conversation? I don't feel comfortable with that. Or is it I don't feel comfortable because this person or this situation is not safe. I need to leave. You can trust those emotions, okay. Right? Yeah. Or be mindful of those things and understand hey, it's okay to kind of get out of that. Or if you see somebody and kind of one of those and they're looking at you and their eyes are very big, that probably means they're uncomfortable and they want help, right? So I think those are important things to trust.
Yeah.
I think there are also times where our emotions can lead us astray. And I've said this multiple times. I've probably said it on this podcast multiple times. You may date somebody, and just because you've dated for a week doesn't mean that you may love them. I don't know. You may feel like you love them. You may feel like they're the one. They may or may not be. So be mindful of that as well. I have known, and I've known people on this, hey, they went on date number 1 and both felt very firmly, we're going to get married. On date number 1, they felt that. Still took them, 3 weeks before they held hands, but they just knew, all right, this is what the Lord has for us. So on the other hand, times when somebody has felt, she's the one or he's the one, and the other person did not reciprocate that. And so clearly your emotions were wrong. They are not the one. So I think you really have to be intentional with discerning these feelings you have, because following Jesus isn't just about our mental game, right? It's not just about having strong minds. Like, we want the Spirit to renew our minds. We see that in Romans chapter 12. Like, it is important for the renewing of our minds. But it also is something that's like, I mean, God has given us our emotions, and He wants us to pursue Him out of a love for Him, a desire for Him, because we recognize what He has done for us. And so there are times where you will feel something. It's like, I feel, okay, the Lord has called me to this, and there will be this resolve that comes from that because it comes from the Lord. But then there are also times where you may initially feel something because of maybe an experience, or the environment is very built for this emotional response. It's okay to ask trusted friends, mentors, pastors, Sunday school teachers, whatever, spiritual just leaders in your life, and say, hey, I'm feeling this. Does this track? Does this make sense? And if they all say no, and you feel like they know you pretty well, then maybe it's something to take into consideration as you pray through those things. And if they say yes, then it's like, okay, I'm going to also continue to pray about this and take it into consideration. So I think that's the important thing when it comes to our emotions.
I do think also it's important in talking about like biblical things. You can't base your truth off of your emotions, because your emotions are always changing, but truth will never change. And so you can't read something and be like, I didn't like what that said, because you're probably feeling convicted. Like, that doesn't mean that can just be thrown out and that doesn't apply to you. And again, like, you can't, emotions are always changing. So why would you want to base something that you're like, I want to have truth in my life and I want to have truth to guide me? Like, why would you want something that is guiding you always changing? Like, you want it to be firm and steadfast, which is obviously the truth.
That's right. And I'm going to bring it up before Krista does. Proverbs 4.
Dang it.
She has her Bible open in Proverbs 4 as well.
I think you were cheating.
I was not. I had mine open.
You were looking over at it.
So far. Before I came in the door,
Sure.
my Bible was open. But we see in Proverbs 4, and I think I feel like I've read it on this podcast before, but maybe I read it on Thursday
You
night.
feel like you've read it?
I
Can
feel
you
like
trust
it.
that feeling?
I can't, because it all blends together. I have no idea. But verse 20 says, my son, pay attention to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. They are not to escape from your sight. Keep them in the midst of your heart. Verse 21 ends with, keep them in the midst of your heart. And then it goes 22, for they are life to those who find them and healing to all their body. 23, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And I want to stop there, because it's very important we see how we need to keep, when he says, pay attention to my words, I mean, his words are Scripture. And how we need to keep Scripture in our sight and close to our heart, or as he mentions, keep them in the midst of your heart. And what does it do? And then we see, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And so we need to be filling ourselves with truth in order to be watching over our heart diligently, because out of it flows the springs of life. Out of it shows us, hey, this isn't just a mental decision. It is also, hey, God cares about all of me, and He desires all of me, and so I need to be emotional. My emotions need to line up with that in that thing as well, and so I think it's something that needs to go hand in hand, not just, hey, I'm going to read this verse or this passage because it makes me feel good. I'm going to go on about my day, but really saying, okay, God, like, I'm going to read your word, and I'm going to allow your word to dictate how I should and should not feel, or certain emotions that I may have regarding a certain issue, or regarding how I respond to these people or whatever, your word is going to really make that decision for me, and then I'm going to pray through that so that my heart aligns with it. That's kind of what we see here and why it's important.
Yeah. And I mean, I would make the argument that like all emotions matter, no matter what they are. All emotions matter. Should you follow all of them? No. We've already established that. Like some emotions that you just don't need to follow.
Well, one thing I want to say about this before, everyone else kind of answers is sometimes you do need like professional help, and that is 100% okay. There are some people, you have past trauma, you have responses, emotional responses, like triggers that you may not even know exist. Or one day you may be fine, and then the next day the same thing kind of happens, and it just like sends you, into this just response. And so understand, I'm not a professional. We aren't necessarily professionals. And so sometimes you do need professional help, counseling through those things. And I would just encourage you to really look for, strong biblical counseling that can help kind of walk through this. That can help just ask questions that you may not even know that you need asked to really get down to kind of some of these root issues to help you walk through these things. So I think that's really important to start this off with before we kind of get into the rest of it.
Emotional regulation involves taking action to overcome a certain emotional response or feeling. What do we have to do to start taking action to acknowledge the feelings and work towards pursuing truth?
Within that, acknowledging the emotion, like we have to acknowledge, that's our starting point, is like, okay, Lord, you've shown me that this emotion in me is not from you. And like very blatantly acknowledge that first. I think that's the very first step in it, is acknowledging that to him and others, like, hey, guys in my accountability group or my mentor, like, the Lord's really shown me that whenever this happens, I feel this way. And he showed me that I shouldn't be feeling that way. And so I think that you've nailed it on the head there. Like, it starts with verbally acknowledging what the emotion is and the situation.
Yeah. So one question I do have that we've like even kind of dealt with a little bit with you and I, Tyson, but just kind of going to, I've seen the emotion and how that emotion looks, and then finding out what's actually rooted from that emotion, like that kind of source point of like where that comes from. How do you kind of go about like finding those things?
I think Kyle talked about it a couple minutes ago when it was like, okay, like talking to people you trust about these things, because like the people you trust see these things in you, and sometimes they may not feel like they have the place, or they don't have the courage to actually be like, oh, like this is a problem I see in you. And so like just talk to people you trust, with 3 or 4 people you trust. Go, hey, like the Lord really showed me this flaw in me, and I want to see what it looks like from your point of view when you see it in me. And then like the more information you can get, like that's how we define, or we can find the point of emphasis, or the point where it started, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think even coming to a place where maybe you don't even see the flaw, but you go to people you trust and say, hey, what do you see in me that is hindering my walk with Jesus, right? And they can, hopefully they'll say it in a loving way, but normally they might be able to pick out a thing or two. It's like, hey, I see this, I see that. And now there can be some things to where it's like, oh, well, whenever you play, sports, you get super, super competitive, which leads to super anger, and then you don't talk to anybody and everybody sees that. But it could be something, there can be things to where it's like, because we all have different personalities. So we all have different things that we think we should prioritize. And it's something that I may be somebody that's very loyal to my friends, and it's to this standard, right? But I can't necessarily project that standard onto other people, to where it's like, well, you know what, Riley, I really see that you're not very loyal to people. Like, they're calling you at 3 a.m. and you're not helping them, or whatever. To where it's like, oh, that's something I would do. Like, that's not fair to really put that onto you. But I think kind of being vulnerable to ask that question, like, hey, what do you see that in me that may be something that I need to be mindful of or watch out for, that I need to kind of work through, walk through. So coming to that place regardless of if you feel like you've seen a flaw in you or not, can be extremely helpful working through your kind of just emotional regulation.
I would also say, and I'm pretty sure this is going along with the question, but just like another idea is even, and I think I've said this on here before, but just writing down the emotions that you feel that you know that aren't of the Lord. So things like anxiety is like just one that comes to my mind. And then writing down the thoughts that contribute to that feeling. So like you're anxious about what are you going to do post graduation? Like write that down. And then you look at it and you're like, what's the lie that I'm believing and what does God's word actually say? And the lie that you're probably believing is if I don't have everything figured out, like I'm a failure. But the truth is that God says that like many are the plans in a person's heart, but Lord's will prevails. And he just calls us to be faithful. And like seeing these truths and replacing those truths, but replacing the lies that you're believing that are contributing to your negative feelings with what God's word actually says and with truth, and combating those feelings and those lies with truth can also help just in those emotional regulation when you are feeling those things, or you're feeling those emotions again that aren't, like Tyson had said, that aren't of the Lord. So
Yeah. So this next question, I've kind of seen within like a lot of the classes I've been taking, when like religion or spirituality has ever been brought up, there's been a lot of church hurt within the classes, within the people that I've met within my classes. And a lot of their church hurt comes from this phrase that it says, it's okay, just pray it away. Like, so anything that you feel, like any negative thing that you may be experiencing, or even situation that you're going through. I heard there's been times in the past where churches have just said, it's okay, and just pray, it'll all be okay. Do you guys think that's helpful, or like where does that stand?
Well, in the grand scheme of things, it probably will be okay. And praying probably is a good thing to do. Yesterday I was talking with our interns and stuff, and in 2 Corinthians 4, Paul talks about our momentary light affliction. And he refers to, the things that we face in this world as momentary light affliction. And so there is part of it to where it's like, yes, I can understand, hey, as a broad scheme, it's, well, yeah, like I should pray for these things. But we also, I think, because of the culture that we live in, we think things will just go away sometimes. Hey, just, pray away your anxiety. Hey, you're in depression. Like, okay, we'll just pray more, have more faith, and that will go away. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. And so I think that's where it gets lost, because when you say that, the expectation is that it will go away. Nothing in Scripture tells us that our trouble, our tribulation, our hardships will just go away, will just magically disappear. There are people that, are just more prone to worry and anxiety for a number of different reasons. That doesn't just mean because I'm praying more that I will no longer be anxious, or I will not be worried. Or that it cannot lead to other things. And so yes, I do think our first response should be to turn to the Lord 100%. But in that, it can be a long list of steps, like, hey, I need to get, as I mentioned, biblical counseling. I need to be in a discipleship relationship. I need to be pursuing Christ actively, spending time in His Word, memorizing His Word, studying His Word, applying His Word to my life and living it out. I need to be praying. I need to be sharing the gospel. Like, these are things I need to be doing. But even if I'm doing all those things, I can still be prone to worry. I can still be prone to depression. I can still be prone, to just like some of these, struggles, loneliness, all of these things. And it's really important for us to understand. And this is why I bring up Hebrews 2, verse 18. For since he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. And a lot of times we think of temptation, we think of like, oh yeah, I'm tempted to maybe look at stuff online, or I'm tempted to fulfill my sinful desires in this way. But temptations can deal with emotions too. I'm tempted to really lash out at this person. I'm tempted to dive deep into this depression or this anxiety, this worry, to dive into this loneliness and start buying into the lies that the enemy is shouting into my head. Like, those are temptations as well that we are called to resist in the Lord. And Hebrews is telling us, hey, he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered. So because he has been tempted in these ways, he is able to help those who are tempted. So if you're in anxiety, depression, loneliness, those things, like, Jesus is able to help you. I mean, think about the fact, like, there are so many examples of when Jesus was probably would have been feeling tempted in loneliness. Matthew 4, he goes into the wilderness 40 days, 40 nights, and he's tempted by the devil, like in the Garden of Gethsemane before he's going to be arrested and persecuted. Like, he is feeling alone, but he is without sin. And so he is able to help us, all of us, in our temptations in our times of need, because he has worked through those things. Now, again, that does not mean our afflictions will go away or that they will disappear forever because we trust in the Lord. I tell students, struggling with lust, hey, guess what? You're going to struggle with it until you're dead. And I'm not saying it to be like, oh, well, it justifies my sin. No, it does not. I'm saying, hey, you can literally go 50 years without looking at anything, without doing anything, and the enemy can throw an image in your head that you looked at when you were a teenager. And it could be 50 years down the road, and he does that to try and get you off track. And the response is, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to allow this thing to control me? And so I think it's just really important to have proper perspective in this and not to be naive. Because a lot of times people will say things, they're not trying to say it in kind of this naive way, like, hey, I don't care about you, just pray more. Sometimes people say the best things, maybe with the best intentions in the most hurtful ways. And that's just because we're people, we're flawed, we make mistakes, we screw up all the time. We don't know what to say, but we think we have to say something when it's really just best not to say anything at all. And so if you've been somebody that has just been brushed off and they're like, oh, just pray more, hey, have more faith, like, please, I just want to encourage you, don't allow those people that maybe have done those things, don't allow it to be something that you really attribute to everyone that goes to church or everyone that believes in Jesus, or every community that's following Christ, because there are people that desperately care about you and they want to see you, have victory over those things. It will take time, and it could take a lifetime. But as I always kind of follow up that statement with, it's like, hey, is Jesus worth it to do that? And so, because he is the only one that provides hope, the only one that truly will never leave us. And so, yeah, so that's what I would say. And I talked way too long about that. My fault.
It's okay. It was good. You guys have anything else to say before we move on to kind of a point in the same area?
I think Kyle took all my points.
Okay, all right. So what should be the balance of relying on our own self-regulation or emotional regulation in giving it up to the Lord in prayer?
I think that, like, the Bible's very specific about praying without ceasing. And so, like, there has to be that part of it always. And then as far as, like, okay, like, what is our job in it outside of prayer and, like, discernment and listening is this idea of, like, okay, like, the Lord wants us to work with him. And so understanding, like, okay, like, he's going to give me tools, he's going to give me tricks to help me regulate my own emotions. And that's awesome, and I'm thankful for that. But never to get to a point where we think that I can do it on my own, that's whenever we start to fall off the wagon and we start falling into maybe a new emotion that we need to regulate. And so I think like the balance between like self-regulation and prayer is always pray. And then never think you can do it on your own. Once we fall in this trap of like, oh, I'm good enough now. I've finally beaten this thing. I don't need the Lord anymore. That's whenever we can fall off and spiral back into something that we never want to spiral into again. And so, like, understanding, like, okay, like, yes, like, there are people around me who are giving me good tips and tricks, but still, ultimately, it's through my reliance on the Lord.
Yeah, I really think it's funny when it's one of those, like, okay, hey, like, if I watch football on Saturday, normally I get really ticked off, right? Like, I'm not necessarily in a good place, but if my team wins, I'm really happy. I really know I need to work on, like, my anger. And then we continue to put ourselves in situations where we're going to get angry. It's like, I know, regardless of if OSU wins or not, there's probably a point in the game where I'm going to be like, this is really dumb. Like, they're making dumb decisions. What are they doing? I'm sure for, you guys, your respective teams, like, there are probably points, like, no matter how much they may win by in the end, there are probably points where you're like, what are they doing? Why'd they do that? That series was just silly. Like, it was stupid. And we expect praying about things to, like, remove, like, I can still enjoy the things I enjoy, and it'll take away, like, my emotional struggle in these areas. When that's not true. It's like, hey, you're the one that has to make the mindful decision to avoid the things that are going to trigger you. Like, if you really want to get your emotions in check and you recognize certain things are an issue that leads you to a bad place emotionally where you're not glorifying the Lord, you have to be diligent. Be like, all right, I'm not going to get on Instagram. I'm not going to get on Facebook. I'm not going to dive into social media. I'm not going to turn on sports, or I'm not going to play video games. If you are somebody that has thrown your controller across the room and broken it playing a video game, time to walk away, okay? Time to walk away. I'm not calling out anybody. I'm just saying. And I'm not above it, but we have to keep those things in their proper place, knowing just because I pray about it doesn't mean God's going to take away that desire to want to, watch football, play video games, gossip, right? Talk about people, be a part of knowing about everybody's life. So we have to be mindful to avoid either people, places, things, environments that are going to lead us into sinful situations.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I think Kyle brings up a really good point about avoidance, and even in this question of like the balance between prayer and like thinking we can do it on our own, is that like if you have a problem and you think that you can just keep running into that wall and fix it yourself, then you're wrong. And like even with you and me, right? Like when we look at some of the emotions that we're trying to regulate, like I would never ask for you to go in a situation without someone there who can check that in you, right? And so it's the same thing. If you think that you are willing to check it in yourself anytime, like that's not how it works. Like you're not being realistic. And so like if you're at a point where it's like, okay, we can start reintroducing some of these stressors to see if I can enjoy it again, if it's something I do enjoy, like we have to make sure that we're with trusted people doing that, so that the moment it becomes back to that sinful emotion, we can be like, hey, no, we're not doing this again. Because I think sometimes we do think that like, I'll just do it on my own. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll just do it on my own. And then we'll say like, but I'm praying, so it's fine. But there's so much freedom in like being accountable, not only to the Lord in prayer, but with the people the Lord has given you, the body of Christ in it all, with this emotional regulation things for some of these things that we can work on with a group of people to be like, hey guys, like today's the day. We're gonna try to win this, and then be like, nope, that was not it, guys. So we still got a lot of work to do, and do it together in community, never on your own.
I'll kind of go into more detail of like what specifically Tyson and I work through. So I specifically like I love volleyball. Like volleyball is something that like I just crave and desire because I love to play it, and I love to be competitive too. But something that has really just hindered me in the past is getting so competitive to the point to where I'm angry. I'm just 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 full steam ahead, just like so angry, and all I see is red. And it's not fruitful. It's not good.
Which is
And
why I love beating Riley in volleyball. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
it's terrible. So yeah, like that's something that I've seriously had to work on. And like, I still love to play volleyball. I love it a lot. But it's like, it's taken literal years to get better and to get to where I'm at this point. I'm still not perfect. I'm still working on it every time I play volleyball. But like the most recent incident, like, was at the BCN volleyball tournament. Tyson was there on the sideline, and every time, like, he would just see it in my face. He knew exactly when I would feel a certain type of way. And he would just be like, hey, breathe. In this moment, breathe. I need you to breathe. And that would just be like a reminder to me. It's okay, what am I here for? I'm not here just to win and be competitive. I'm here to be an image of Christ. Like, I'm supposed to be here as a leader. And if I'm angry and trying to beat the other team into the ground, that is not Christ-like. I don't need to be doing that. So like, just having that person to go and walk beside you, and during this journey of emotional regulation, of trying to overcome things that aren't of Christ, is something that, like, I recommend for everybody, because we're stronger together. And like Tyson said, you can't do it alone. Like, it's absolutely impossible. I've tried. It doesn't work. So kind of with the last question, or did you guys have anything else to add on that point? No? Okay. What are some, like, final emotional regulation techniques that you guys would have for the listeners whenever you are praying to the Lord, and like you are coming to the Lord and being in His presence about these things, but you want to maybe find some techniques of, like, breathing techniques, or just like trying to find the root of these emotions. How do you guys do those, or do that?
We live in a very, just kind of a very interesting time, because I think people are more open and transparent about their emotional health, about their mental health, and kind of where they're at. And so they're not necessarily ones to shy away from saying, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I need. I think with that comes a lot of maybe times where we use it as a crutch, though. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, well, you know what, I can't be there because emotionally I just need a break. And that, I'm not saying that that's not true, right? But I think we have to kind of be mindful and understand, okay, how do I begin to operate my life through this, through dealing with my emotions, through regulating my emotions. I have 2 children that are still working through like, okay, hey, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. I can't just start saying I hate everything, right? I hate this family. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to do that. Like, and these are very real things that can come up for multiple reasons, right? But it's like, we can't just have maybe a bad experience or an just kind of enjoyable experience because maybe we're exhausted or frustrated or had a long day, and then we're just like, oh, I'm going to cut everything out. So I think with those things, it's very important for us to be talking about our emotions in the proper place that they are, and understanding, hey, my emotions are not supposed to rule over me. If I am a follower in Jesus, out of a byproduct of what Christ has done for me, me repenting my sins, Him being Lord and Savior of my life, I want to walk in obedience, and walking in obedience requires everything. And that requires our emotional life, that requires our mental health, like all of those things are now going to be surrendered to Him, filtered through Him and His Word, His Spirit. And so I would really say, if you're looking at, hey, I want to get in a place emotionally healthy, we need to not be using our emotions as a crutch to justify maybe things that we want to do or things we don't want to do. And then we also need to have accountability and people in our life that will call us out on our stuff that we may be tempted to like lose it on them, right? Because we're only seeing red, but then we realize, oh, like I need to chill out. So I think those are kind of, I mean, some of the steps I would encourage in that is really, I mean, surrounding ourselves with some trusted friends, some believers, and they may be heading in the same direction. They want the same thing we want. They want to be kind of emotionally strong. They want to be mentally strong. And what does that look like? Or healthy. They want to be healthy in the Lord. What does that look like? And dive into those things is really what I would encourage.
I'm a big fan of breathing techniques. When it comes to like the worst of the worst, that's whenever your emotions kind of take over completely. And so I'm a big fan of breathing techniques. So the one I always use is called square breathing. It's in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4. And you do that and try to use it to kind of like center yourself. And when it comes to breathing techniques, oftentimes we try to learn them at the extremes. But for me, like I use square breathing all the time. And I practice it all the time. So that way, whenever my life gets stressful, the first thing I do is I revert back to what I practice. So that means I practice square breathing. So my life gets stressful, I start square breathing. And like that's the model whenever it comes to like these small helpful tricks is we have to understand that we need to practice them when we're not in the emotion if we want them to work and be the first thing in our forefront of our mind when we're in the emotion. And so I'm a big fan of square breathing and start there and breathe and start to work through what are these things and why are you feeling them. And being able to say like, well, I don't know why. I don't know why I feel anxious in the moment. That's okay too. But working through like calming yourself down, talking to the Lord in it is a good place to start and be okay with like, okay, I don't know why I got angry. I don't know why I got sad. I don't know why I got anxious, but let's bring ourselves back to the center so that we can, be a human again is what I say, and start working through these things with people.
I think, and we've said this multiple times, just going back to the root of everything and finding out, like, I mean, if you are feeling anxious every time you get onto Instagram, maybe it's because you're comparing your life with other people on there. So maybe you need to get rid of Instagram, and that's the root. Or maybe every time you see somebody, some particular person, like they just make you angry. I don't know. And you're like, I need to have a conversation with this person and ask for forgiveness and get rid of the root of that anger and move on. And I really think, and that's just a lot of what I do is when I feel a lot of emotion, sometimes I'm like, I don't exactly know why I feel that way. And so I try to go back to the root. And sometimes, like Tyson said, like sometimes I just feel anxious or something and I don't know why I feel that way, but it also depends on how I'm going to respond in that moment of, am I going to allow this anxiety to rule over me and ruin my entire day, my entire week, whatever, or am I going to like give it over to the Lord and talk to somebody about it? Like we've also talked about, and work through it, even if I don't know exactly what is causing that.
Yeah. I would say for like last thing is be okay with not being in control. And the way to do that is by understanding the things you can control. So like in a moment where you may be feeling a lot of things and almost overwhelmed, you may be anxious, angry, sad, happy, or like just completely overwhelmed with emotions. Just center yourself, like remind yourself where you're at right now. Okay, I'm sitting around a table with Krista, Tyson, and Kyle, and I'm talking to a mic with Gavin over there. Like I'm centering myself where I'm at. Like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now, and this is okay. Everything else is out of my control. And what I have right now is, or what I can control is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's okay. If you have homework and you've got to be somewhere in 30 minutes, or if you have a bunch of things that you have lined up for the rest of the day, you're not there right now. You're just not, and you're sitting where you're at, or you're standing where you're at and doing what you're doing. So be there in those moments. Yeah. And that's what I found like most helpful for me is whenever my mind is racing and I've got so many things on my plate and I've got homework due in 2 hours. Like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do all of this? Okay, well, I'm here right now. I'm not doing those things right now. I know what I have to do, but I'm not doing those things right now. And I can control what I can control right now, and that's okay.
Yeah,
So-
and I would just add on to that, like, it could be something that's like, hey, this is what God has for me, right? Like in this moment, having this conversation with this student or this classmate, and maybe they're going through a hard time. Maybe they've reached out to me because they know I'm a believer, and they're asking me questions, or they're just really struggling with like just being hopeless. And it's like, I have an assignment due, right? I've got these things I've got to do. Now, there's some of us, I'm sure Tyson and I would probably fall into the same boat here. We're going to sacrifice all things academic for the sake of relationship building and just gospel conversation and whatnot. But there's some of you that's like very type A. It's like, whoa, this is getting in the way of my schedule. Center yourself on, hey, this is what God has for me, right? Like, I know maybe I've put myself in a position where my homework's not done. Maybe I stayed up late playing video games or watching a movie, whatever. But as you mentioned, like center yourself, but then also remind yourself, like, hey, like who's the one that I put my trust in, right? It's the Lord. How am I going to get out of this situation? How am I going to make it through this? And sometimes it is just, all right, I'm probably not going to get the A I need on this assignment or whatever that looks like. And I'm not encouraging you to neglect your homework, okay? Be diligent in your studies. But there are times where God's going to maybe interrupt your life a little bit as a reminder that we serve him in obedience. And so I would just, really even remind ourselves of that because I can do it too, fall into the trap of just being like, I've got to get this done, I've got to get this done, I've got to get this done. And there's a student over there like, hey, I really just needed to talk to you about some stuff. And if I miss out on that, I've missed out on what the real priority should have been, right?
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing too, because I've already dealt with this a lot recently, is especially when this podcast comes out, you're going to be weeks away from finals. And for college students, you have to understand that as you go out throughout the semester, your bandwidth of emotion and like stress that you can put up with shrinks. And it gets smaller and smaller and smaller through the end of the semester. And so by this point, something that may not have bothered you in August may absolutely send you through the roof now. And so when we talk about emotions and truth and lies and all that kind of stuff, like understand that, like, okay, like, yeah, every semester when it gets close to finals, like I'm going to be a little stressed. I'm going to be a little on edge. And so I need to go into it knowing that, like, okay, like I'm here for the Lord and not just for my stress or my anxiety or whatever. And so knowing, like, okay, like it's the week before finals week, I need to give myself more grace and other people more grace.
All right. Okay, sweet. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Be sure to tune in next week where we'll be having another awesome discussion. And if you want more information or want to ask us a question, make sure to follow us on Instagram at UCO BCM.